The AC40 is part of the next America's Cup cycle. It's an amazing machine, a development of the AC75s of the last Cup. But the AC40 is more than simply a smaller version of the 75-footer. It's been described as a pathway to the America's Cup, with both youth and women's events taking place in 2024 in Barcelona, ahead of the Cup itself. But even then, there's a lot more to this new project. In fact, I'd argue that it's the technology that you can't see that makes it possible to bring this fleet downstream to an even broader audience. I've yet to see one in the flesh, but I recently caught up with someone who has, and he was buzzing about what these boats could mean for Grand Prix racing. Nick Griffith is the Ancasta Group boss and described what the current state of play is with the AC40, along with quite a few things I didn't know about this new project. I met up with him on the River Hamble. Okay, Nick, let's start with a few facts. You've just come back from New Zealand where you've seen the AC40, one of the few people to actually see one close up. With your Ancasta hat on, you're planning to sell these boats into the market beyond sort of Cup teams. That's quite an ambitious call, isn't it, for a boat of this type? What gives you that confidence?
Ancasta Group has been representing McConaughey yachts for a long, long time. McConaughey's are Emirates Team New Zealand's partners in the AC40 program. In actual fact, the design was obviously completed by Emirates Team New Zealand. The boats were built at McConaughey's facilities in America. Well, the majority of the boats were manufactured at their facilities in China. So that's kind of where we got involved in the program. Initially, and I think the protocol was calling for these 40s to be built to provide boats for both the women's America's Cup as well as the Youth America's Cup. And I think what transpired was that in comparison to obviously to the 75s, it's a much simpler boat to sail, although probably just about as complex under the surface. And so I think Emirates Team New Zealand and McConaughey's looked at this and they thought it's working for the youth teams and the women's pathways. And they said, well, is this not feasible to be selling this very exciting form of racing to the broader boat buyers or boat owners, racing boat owners? And so we've had a discussion internally over the last couple of months and whatever, and it does appear to be very viable. And what I saw in Auckland last week, I spent 2 days with Emirates Team New Zealand at their base, looking at, having a close look at hull number one, and it's an incredibly impressive program, and we know Emirates Team New Zealand capabilities of developing and designing all these things. It's a long history they've had in that, and I think also McConaughey's as their partners have done a fantastic job. And what impressed me the most was that they built these boats, they were designed, they were built in effect remotely. The boat arrived, hull number one arrived in Auckland. They wheeled it out, put the mast in it, put some sails off and went yachting in it, and the thing worked. And it didn't have to go back into the shed and get re-engineered and whatever. And that's extraordinary.
It's got to be manageable as well, though, hasn't it? I mean, I think that's the thing that really strikes me about it is, like you, I've watched these boats, watched the AC75s a lot, and there's still extraordinary things to see. Sail a big boat sailing with no keel and flying on one hull, it's on one foil, it's all bizarre. What strikes me is that technology behind the scenes seems to be what's making this possible with autopilot systems and flight control systems. Is that what you saw when you were down there?
Well, I saw, my purpose for going down there is one, I mean, you can only extract so much from a video and from correspondence and whatever. I wanted to go down there, one, to see if this is actually a deliverable product. Our organisation has spent the last 35 years selling boats to all sorts of people with all sorts of different skill levels and whatever. And it's different if you're selling a boat that's going to be run and managed by an America's Cup campaign. Not everyone has an America's Cup campaign to organise a boat. So what I was looking at was, is this actually something that a private individual, granted with some pretty high-end and professional help, would they be able to maintain it? Would they be able to sail it, manage it, run it, and use it as we would do any other race boat? And in summary, or to be brief, to the point, yes, it is, and I only became convinced of this having seen the boat, seen Team New Zealand operate the boat, and get a better understanding of the boat. It's very, very usable and very manageable. The boat itself is powered by batteries. There's no physical, we don't have it as on the 75s and indeed in the AC50s, in the catamarans, where we rely very heavily on manpower, be it grinders or cycles or whatever. It's just run by that. The AC40s have got a most fantastic autopilot, and it's not an autopilot like we're used to that relies on wind instruments, etc., etc. It just relies on the gyro compass. And basically, what the autopilot does, it controls the ride height, the pitch, and the roll of the boat to give it a stable platform. You, as crew, will feed parameters into that, which will adjust that. So, for example, you would have different parameters. If you saw breeze ahead, you would adjust it, modify it, do it, whatever. And then the rest of the crew, the helms are steering, very straightforward exercise, and then you've got the wing trimmer, if you like, or mainsail trimmer, to use a more traditional term, and then the jib trimmer. And because of that autopilot, it suddenly becomes a much more feasible it's a much more manageable piece of kit.
Does that mean that the fourth person then could be your co-skipper, your coach,
Yep.
or in the case of a private owner, you
Yep.
could have someone keeping an eye on you, albeit from the other side of the boat,
Yep.
or behind you?
Yep.
Or...
Well, I mean, it was explained to me, and not having been on the boat, steered the boat, but the guys at Team New Zealand were saying basically, with the autopilot, with obviously the wing trimmer and the jib trimmer, you can pretty much sit there and steer the boat between probably, I don't know, 30, apparent wind angles from 30 to all the way up to 140, and pretty much go wherever you wanted to go. And that's what it looked like. One of the things I went down there to do was just to look at the practicalities of owning one of these things. Where do you keep it? How do you do? What is it? And I think probably the nearest thing I got to probably the biggest challenge is it doesn't have a motor, but nor does a 6 metre or nor does a 12 metre. You will have a tender. Draft-wise, it was fine, and the manoeuvring, as I said, it's a bit like handling a 6 metre. I mean, if you've ever raced a 6 metre, you need your tender, your small tender with someone in it to manoeuvre you around, and it's no more complicated than that.
What about maintenance? I mean, with such sophisticated systems on the boat, they're often, I know, with cut boats, it's sort of, well, as you alluded to earlier on, it's inconceivable that a privateer could really run a cut boat campaign.
Yeah.
And the same was said of things like Volvo 70s and other high-tech machines, wasn't it?
From what I've seen and what I understand and witnessed, the systems are incredibly reliable, and the engine and the design that's gone into it, etc., makes that. The rig is beautifully designed. It's relatively simple. Yes, you've got the twin skin mainsail, which has its benefits in comparison to our more traditional type of race boats, in so much as that these sails don't flap, and therefore as a consequence they don't flap. If they don't flap, they don't degrade very much. So your sail program is going to, for example, is going to be much cheaper. And then the systems, as far as the mast is concerned, the standing rigging, it's all kind of off-the-shelf type stuff. I was interested to see what they were using for a power pack. I was expecting some sort of very sophisticated car type battery. No, it's 3 batteries. And these things they take out of the boat, they can recharge them, whatever. And the interesting thing with the power pack is that, unlike you may have witnessed with the Cats and the 75s, they'll change the power packs over halfway through the day, whatever. There's enough power on these batteries to run these boats for a full day's racing. And I mean, you could have a 3 or 4 short, race day, and you don't need to do that. The batteries are there. They've got enough onboard power to run everything for a day. So that's very practical.
Yeah. What does one cost?
Right, on the water, the bottom line is it's $2.8 million US, and for your $2.8 million, you have your 40-foot flatbed container. When I say container, flat rack, the boat, sails, instrumentation. There's within that, there's a budget for the communications, because the communications on these sorts of boats is really, really important. In actual fact, there's been an awful lot of time and energy has gone into it to make a system that works, very similar to what we see with the AC40s. And so there's all the other associated equipment that you require for looking after the boat, everything from the stanchions that they put in place when the boat goes up on the cradle. The cradle's a part of it. So it's a very complete package, and the detail is fantastic.
Amazing.
It is genuinely deliverable. I think it's really exciting.
I just want to go back. So the $2.8 million, how does that compare? I mean, to a lot of people that sound like a lot of money, but how does that compare to other sort of equivalent Grand Prix classes?
Well, where I sort of position, where we see this boat, and we position this boat, it's similar to say Med Cup boats, the TP52 programs. A modern day TP52 is probably just the build of the boat. The first boat is going to be about $3 million. So the TP52 is very comparable. I think the running costs of the AC40 will be significantly less than a TP52. our view, the budgets that we've put together and assembled, one, you're only dealing with 3 professional crew plus one assumes the owner. You will have someone driving. You'll probably have your coach or your tender driver around racing these sorts of things. So you haven't got the same, a TP52 team sort of numbers between 15 and 20 people if you count the shore crew and everybody else, and then you've got all the expenses of doing that. So it's from that perspective, it's much cheaper to run. It's cheaper to build, and also one of the big costs of a TP52 program is the sale budget.
Yeah,
and the sale budget is not in comparison is a fraction of. For an AC40 is a fraction of what you find with the TP52. And then we've also seen other classes, the GC32, very similar sorts of numbers. I think probably the initial upfront cost of an AC40 because of its sophistication is obviously higher than that, but the ongoing running costs and et cetera, would be, say, if you were doing a 6 to 10 event circuit, would be less because one crew numbers are less, and all those sorts of things. And then the other model that we would look to emulate with this class would be, the fantastic success they've had with the RC44s. Very similar, very high level of sailing, fantastic events in lots of lovely locations, and really nice boats to sail. I would suggest, we would argue that, okay, the AC40 is a sort of that's the next evolution of those sorts of classes, be it a TP, an RC44, or indeed the GC32, and indeed other classes.
That leads me in quite nicely actually into my next question, which is, okay, so I go and buy one. So where am I going to play?
That is evolving. That is most definitely a moving feast. We have a number of owners have expressed interest. In fact, one owner has put some money down, but subject to us finding another 4 private owners, where the privately owned fleet will interact with the youth programs and the women's programs. And let's keep in mind that the AC40, as far as we understand, is that it is part of 2 America's Cup cycles. So these boats are going to be around. So there's longevity there. So there's going to be fleet racing in between. We envisage it to be a very similar setup to an owner-driven. Although and I say we, the builders, the manufacturers, and the marketeers, if you like, of the fleet will be providing the support. And Team New Zealand, Emirates Team New Zealand, are very committed, as are McConaughey's, to supporting whatever circuit that evolves. And that will be down to the owners. We're going to put a collection of owners together. Here are their boats. Let's put together a circuit and whatever.
I guess the whole project benefits in a way from the fact that it is a one design, isn't it? And it's a one design that's already, we'll come on to this in a minute, but it's a one design that's already got a number of customers. It's not a wishful thinking project. This is happening. It's got to happen because it's got to happen for the America's Cup. So it must benefit from there. And certainly one designs, when you get decent numbers, allow you to sort of go to that level of detail, don't they?
Well, when they started putting the whole project together, they knew because of the protocol that they were going to have to build at least 8 of these boats for the various teams and whatever to fulfil their obligations under the protocol. And so they've taken what we would consider a production approach to it.
The other thing I noticed the other day, and maybe you can confirm this, is I wasn't fully aware of this until quite recently, but as part of the youth and women's America's Cup teams, I thought they were just limited to the America's Cup teams themselves, but they're not, are they?
No,
you can have up to, I think it's 12 teams in all.
That's right.
So actually people from outside can come in and have a go at the America's Cup. Now that hasn't happened.
I don't know whether it was deliberate. I'd like to think it was planned. I think that was a masterstroke of the guys that put the protocol together. But also the point you make is that whatever happens, if we have no success in finding private owners to acquire these boats, there are going to be 10 in the world at least. And that, as you say, that's starting new one design classes and having a foundation set in stone of 10 boats supported by Emirates Team New Zealand and McConaughey's and
when are we getting one?
Good question. We are with the current commitment levels to fulfil for the youth, for the cup teams, and the additional youth and women's boats. We're looking for delivery of hull number 1 into private hands in August 23.
Taking a particularly parochial approach, I guess, and sitting here in the Solent in the sort of the heart of sort of big boat sailing in the UK, do you see them sailing here?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Do you?
Absolutely. I was sitting there. I was looking when I went down to Auckland, and I was measuring up the cradle. I think, okay, well, if we're going to park, I'm going to park 5 of these at Hamble Yacht Services. Granted, I mean, the thing is, these are expensive pieces of kit. But, you know, we've got race boats that come in and out of this yard on a fairly regular basis. They're based here for quite long periods of time that cost significantly more than an AC40. I
was thinking more about the brambles being in the middle of the race
course.
course.
Well, exactly. But I mean,
knots.
The racing side of it is, it was interesting because you don't get this from the videos, but until you've seen one of these things going upwind, and yes, they are going upwind very, very quickly, and you can see the breeze on the water. Yes, they're looking for shifts, they're looking for this, they're looking for that, and I can see 6, 8, 10 boats. I don't think you're going to have 70 AC40s coming off the start line as you might at an Etchell Worlds or whatever, but certainly, if I keep going back to this analogy of the 6 metre, which is just ridiculous when you consider the differences between the boats. But yeah, I think the Solent could support racing, 8 to 10 of these boats racing quite happily on the Solent. It'd be a fantastic event.
Very exciting. Good. Well, thanks for letting us know, and we'll keep checking in with you.
Terrific. Cheers.
Cheers.